Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara. Welcome to you wherever you are, in the physical space of our beautiful sanctuary, or joining us from your own sanctuary in front of the screen. We're so honored that you've set aside time to be with us this morning. At the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara, we are a diverse community of seekers where all people of goodwill are welcome. Our community embraces you, whether you were brought up Unitarian, came to Unitarian Universalism from a wide range of other faiths, or as today's service illustrates, welcomes folks like me, a wandering Jew, who has found acceptance and comfort here without sacrificing core beliefs or cherished traditions. In this community, we strive to live with integrity, nurture wonder, and inspire the actions that will transform us and transform the world. We'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors joining us for the first time. If you'd like to keep in touch or learn more about the Unitarian Society, please stop by the welcome table in the courtyard, or if you're joining us remotely, sign our virtual guest book. I'm Ellen Broidy, a member of the Worship Arts team, and I'm joined by music director Matthew Grisette, singers from the Justice Choir, and members of our congregation who volunteered to participate in this morning's lay-led service. There's a lot going on at the Unitarian Society, and I'm going to make a bunch of announcements, and I already realized I'm going to forget to announce a lot of things too. So at coffee hour, wander around and get all the information that you're not going to get from me now. But at coffee hour, which is immediately following the service, you're invited to join members of the Board of Trustees and the Anti-Racism Commission to learn more about the renaming of the Jefferson Window. Background information is available on why this is being proposed. Inspiration is available for what other name might take its place, and printed forms are available to submit your nominations. The team, the Anti-Racism Commission and the board are gathering nominations through April 16th. Then the process of ranked choice voting will begin to create a short list of candidates. This will be followed by a congregational and ministerial conversation about the finalists, leading up to a vote at this year's annual meeting on June 4th. So stop by the table, see who's already been nominated. Our special ecumenical Passover service will take place at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, April 5th. Nancy Beiser will be at a table in the courtyard where people can still sign up to attend. The Hunt for Justice, our annual Easter egg hunt, is scheduled for April 9th. And if you will look in your order of service, there's a beautiful card, beautiful flyer announcing Gun Etiquette, the gun game show, a multimedia artist Dana Zerzolo. So that's on Friday, April 14th, here at 6:30 p.m. USSB is partnering with Congregation B'nai B'rith for a Yom HaShoah Holocaust Remembrance Service the evening of April 16th. And on a lighter note, there's an open mic scheduled for April 30th. And I'd like to invite Kathleen Bohm up to make another announcement.
So this Friday, April 7th, is the first Friday of the month. So Alliance has its speaker and tea at 2 o'clock here in Parish Hall. And this month, we're going to be hearing from Lisa Carlos, who comes with us with a background of living in, being raised in Santa Barbara, educated in Stanford and Harvard, and she is going to let us know facts on local housing, demographics, solutions, and advocacy strategies. So a question we've asked ourselves many a time, what can we do to help about our housing crisis, is going to be there in your afternoon presentation. So come and join us for a tea after the presentation and the information sharing. Thank you.
We are not ignoring April's birthdays, but Julia will honor those folks who have April's birthdays next week. Is there anybody else who has an announcement that they failed to inform me of in advance? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Wednesday's the Seder, not just the service. Wednesday, April 5th, yes. 5 o'clock. Talk to Nancy Beiser. Okay. I've been practicing for weeks on this, my favorite instrument, the bowl gong, so I'm going to try it now. So take a deep breath, settle yourself comfortably wherever you are, center your body and your mind and your soul, open the doors of your heart, and please join together with us for our time of worship. And I'd like to invite Joan Ariel to share with us the words for this morning's chalice lighting. If you're joining us virtually and have a chalice or a candle to light, please do so and enter into the chat "chalice is lit on" and the name of your street or town. While we cannot see the flames, we know they're burning bright throughout our community.
Good springtime sunshine morning.
Yes.
This morning's chalice lighting comes from the last stanzas of a poem by Marge Piercy, taken from her 2000 collection, beautifully titled "The Art of Blessing the Day." The poem is entitled Maggid. A Maggid is an itinerant Jewish preacher. So they walked out of Egypt. We Jews are all born of wanderers, with shoes under our pillows and a memory of blood that is ours raining down. On Passover, we honor those Jews who chose the desert over bondage, who walked into the strange and became strangers, and gave birth to children who could look down on them, standing on their shoulders for having been slaves. We honor those who let go of everything but freedom, who ran, who revolted, who fought, who became other by saving themselves.
Every Sunday, we take a moment to reflect upon changes and change makers we have witnessed and add these to our change jar. At the risk of being completely contrary, my choice for inclusion in the change jar today is an example of resistance to change, an illustration that change, in and of itself, is not always positive. I'd like to lift up the citizens of Israel who took to the streets in record numbers, night after night, to protest the proposed changes that would undermine the independence of the judiciary and endanger the democracy of that country. If you've been moved by something you witnessed, something you did or experienced that brought positive change or resisted negative change in the world, please type it into the chat or share with your friends during coffee hour. Change for the good is change for the future.
Please rise as we sing hymn 104, When Israel Was in Egypt's Land.
a little bit about the Seder that is planned for this coming Wednesday.
Good morning. Passover is part of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. It comes to us from our Jewish ancestors who have held this event annually for thousands of years. Passover is celebrated through a ceremonial meal called a Seder, which includes the retelling of the story of how Moses led his people out of slavery. Everyone who, adults and children alike, who attends this Seder shares in the story's retelling. The Seder leads us to reflect on why freedom and justice are so important for everyone, and how we must continue the work of eliminating injustice and the many forms of enslavement in the world today. The content of the Seder has been passed down by tradition, and it has been reinterpreted from time to time, so that it is not only a celebration of the past, but a commitment to the present and the future. In addition to the story of Moses and the Israelites, the Seder honors spring. It includes many symbols and rituals celebrating the coming of spring and the hope that it brings. This celebration emphasizes the importance for us all to take actions in our current lives that will enable all people to experience freedom.
Take me out to the ball game. You know, it started this week, right? Yeah. Okay, so I need a team. I need 11 people. Come on up. Come on up. Keep coming till we get to 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here comes someone from the back. 8. Yeah, next to Nancy. Stay in order. You might be wondering what these people are doing. So at Passover, part of the Seder is for kids to get involved, and we want to include them and make them feel part of it. And there's a very old song. It comes out of the Yiddish tradition called Had Gad Yah, which means one kid, not a little kid, but a goat. And the story of the goat and what happens to the goat is seen as a metaphor for what happened to Jewish people throughout history. Not a very pretty story, but it's a fun song. So I'm going to teach you your part, and I believe we're going to get all the lyrics up above. If we don't, that's okay, because your part's really easy. It goes, Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. Can we try that? Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Okay. Oh, yeah. Right to left. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so, like in Hebrew. Okay, so each verse of the song mentions a character in the song. You all are representing those characters. When you hear your character, hold it up. And it comes over and over again. You'll see. I'll come up here so people can see you all. All right. Ready? Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. My father bought a kid for to zuzim. Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. Then came a cat and ate the kid that my father bought for to zuzim. Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. It's to zuzim. Yeah. Oh. Then came a dog and bit the cat that came along and ate the kid that my father bought for to zuzim. Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. Then came a stick that beat the dog that came along and bit the cat that came along and ate the kid that my father bought for to zuzim. Had Gad Yah, Had Gad Yah. Then came fire that burnt the stick, that came along and beat the dog, that came along and bit the cat, that came along and ate the kid, that my father bought for to zoos him. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came water that quenched the fire, that came along and burnt the stick, that came along and beat the dog, that came along and bit the cat, that came along and ate the kid, that my father bought for to zoos him. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came water that quenched the fire, that came along and burnt the stick, that came along and beat the dog, that came along and bit the cat, that came along and ate the kid, that my father bought for to zoos him. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came an ox that drank the water, that came along and quenched the fire, that came along and burnt the stick, that came along and beat the dog, that came along and bit the cat, that came along and ate the kid, that my father bought for to zoos him. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came a butcher, it's a nice looking butcher. Then came a butcher that slew the ox, that drank the water, that quenched the fire, that burnt the stick, that beat the dog, that came along and bit the cat, that came along and ate the kid, that my father bought for to zoos him. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the angel of death, that came along and killed the butcher, that came along and slew the ox, that came along and drank the water, that came along and quenched the fire, that came along and burnt the stick, that came along and beat the dog, that came along and bit the cat, that my father bought for to zoos him. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the Holy One, blessed be God, that destroyed the angel of death, that killed the butcher, that slew the ox, that drank the water, that quenched the fire, that burnt the stick, that beat the dog, that bit the cat, that ate the kid, that my father bought for to zoos him. Everyone, Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Thank you. Thanks to our participants. I think I told them. Charlotte's asking me what does Chad Gadya mean, but I thought I said Chad Gadya means one little kid, but not a little kid, a little goat. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Our children out.
That's a hard act to follow. This morning's reading is a slightly adapted version of Passover Remembered, a poem by spiritual leader Alla Bozarth Campbell. As we say, some of the names have been changed to protect the innocent. God is changed to spirit guide, but you may replace it if that feels more true to you. Pack nothing. Bring only your determination to serve and your willingness to be free. Don't wait for the bread to rise. Take nourishment for the journey, but eat standing. Be ready to move at a moment's notice. Do not hesitate to leave your old ways behind. Fear, silence, submission. Only surrender to the need of the time, to love justice, and walk humbly with your spirit guide. Begin quickly, before you have time to sink back into slavery. Set out in the dark. You will find a fire to encourage and warm you. Your spirit guide will be with you in the fire and with you in the cloud. May you have dreams in the desert to guide you safely home, to that place you have not yet seen. You are being sent into the wilderness to make a new way. Some of you will be so changed by the weathers and wanderings that even your closest friends will have to learn your features as though for the first time. Some of you will not have changed at all. Some will be abandoned by your dearest loves and misunderstood by those who have known you since birth and feel abandoned by you. Some will find new friendships in unlikely faces and old friends as faithful and true as the pillars of your faith. Sing songs as you go and hold close together. You may at times grow confused and lose your way. Touch each other and keep telling stories. Make maps as you go, remembering the way back from before you were born. So you will be only the first of many waves of deliverance on these desert seas. It is the first of many beginnings, your Passover. Remain true to this mystery. Pass on the whole story. Do not go back. We are together on this journey. We are together now. We are waiting for each other.
And now we'll take some time to meditate.
Hello again. Has anyone ever eaten matzah before? Yeah, lots of people, okay. Have you ever held it up to the light and looked through it? It's got holes. And it's kind of like a lens. That'll come back. Most people know very little about Jewish religious observance. And even I, who, until I spent 20 years raising my children in a Reformed Jewish temple in San Diego, I'd be included in that majority of people. Even though I'm Jewish, my family growing up was devoutly, perhaps rigidly, secular. We were Orthodox atheists. We honored our Jewish identities by embracing a type of Judaism that really only existed in the working class neighborhoods of New York, where politics, often communism, Yiddish culture, and partial assimilation to an American way of life were the norms. Because I had only this background of my parents and their friends to draw from, I never knew how odd we all were as Jews, particularly in our observance of Passover. So for most American Jews, and this has changed a lot, but not entirely. For most American Jews, Passover is about the meal, the traditional meal that you might have heard of. It has matzah, a Seder plate, and other symbolic foods and practices. And if you come Friday, you'll get to learn all about it. Or Wednesday at 5, thank you. The Seder, what we call the Passover celebration, included the reading of the Haggadah, which is the telling of the story of the Jewish people and their freedom from slavery in Egypt. You know the Moses story. If you've seen the Ten Commandments or The Prince of Egypt, a movie I recommend highly, actually, many Jewish families have since 1932, or for the past 91 years, used a promotional Haggadah created by Maxwell House. Yes, the coffee company. Even President Obama used this Haggadah, the coffee Haggadah, from 2009 to 2016 in the White House Seders. It's true. It's kind of a terrible Haggadah. It's long and boring, but it's been in our people's tradition for generations, over 90 years. My parents were very familiar with this kind of Haggadah and were determined to recreate the stories, rituals, songs, and foods to match our belief system. They weren't alone. Really, the whole Reformed Jewish movement has worked to recreate and reinterpret Judaism to make it more meaningful and relevant. In the 1970s, my mother's women's group, remember women's groups? Developed a feminist, socialist, folk music Passover, Haggadah, that my family has used since then with minor tweaks to make the politics and songs a bit more up to date. You might wonder, well, what is political about Passover? Well, okay, so this is why I want to share with you my family's traditional Passover. Because for me, it was the gateway drug to Unitarian Universalism. Seriously. We kept the traditional story of Moses, even mentioning God's plagues on Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. But from the opening pages, our Seder service links the story of Jewish struggle to the freedom struggles of people around the world. While we discuss the freeing of the Jewish slaves, we also talk about the freeing of black slaves here in the US, and we sing Go Down Moses, which is a gospel song from slavery times. We also talk about the civil rights movements for Black, Latino, Native American, and queer people. We sing Beethoven's Ninth Anthem with very Unitarian Universalist lyrics about all nations coming together in peace and beloved community. We share the story of the Holocaust from the perspective of those who fought back against the Nazis, yet another freedom struggle. And we light 6 memorial candles and sing the partisan hymn, Zognet Kainmo, in Yiddish and English to honor the martyrs. This holiday, more than any other, solidified my Jewish identity. My mother, like any traditional Jewish mother or wife, spent days in preparation. We didn't clean fanatically, ridding our kitchen of chametz, which is the forbidden leavened breads and pastas that Orthodox families refuse to eat for the whole Passover period. But we prepared the home for the many guests who came. We once hosted nearly 50 people in our backyard. We opened our home to the stranger, as we are commanded to do, to share our peculiar but very loving type of Judaism and Jewish observance. And I thought until I went to college that this is what all Jews did. This kind of communist, Pete Seeger-inspired, Beethoven singing, civil rights movement. Whoa, feminist Seder. I'm exuberant. But when I brought my mother's Haggadah to my dorm in college, my Jewish friends were a little shocked. What is this? They said. This isn't how we do Passover. I remember another friend saying that by not being more religious and not honoring the 10 commandments, particularly the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me, that we were not even really Jews. I was flabbergasted. How could this universal celebration of people's freedom, this honoring of our Yiddish foremothers and forefathers, this embracing of the unity of Black, brown, white, Asian, and Native peoples not be what Judaism is all about? I've learned that some of it is part of a lot of Jewish people's sense of Judaism, particularly in places like B'nai B'rith here in Santa Barbara. But the reason why I say the Seder was my gateway drug to Unitarian Universalism is that when I started coming to UU, I found some of the same feelings of beloved community, rewritten hymns with universalist themes, honoring of the disadvantaged and discriminated against, sharing in song and laughter and celebration as I had growing up in my family's Passover Seders. My faith, my personal spirituality grew to embrace both the secular Judaism of my childhood and the Unitarian Universalism of today through this lens of Passover past. We could call it a matzah lens. This way of seeing helps to blend into the stained glass that we all look through to find our place in this faith and in this beloved community. Happy Passover.
Thank you so much for enduring our sort of DUI service this morning. We're having fun. We hope you are too. Every week, the Unitarian Society gives away a portion of our Sunday offerings to support projects and community partners that share our deepest values. This month, we're supporting the Alternatives to Violence Project, and Donis Galvin is here to provide some information about this very worthy cause. Donis?
Well, as you've seen, human beings are expressive. And when they can't express themselves, sometimes they become violent. I have been violent. But it wasn't that led me to the Alternatives to Violence project. It was an article I read in the newspaper years ago. The Alternatives to Violence project began 50 years ago after the Attica prison uprising, when a group of inmates and Quakers volunteers helped design a program that would teach nonviolent skills. Since then, it's become an international movement whose guiding philosophy is that there is a power for peace and good in everyone, and that the power has the ability to transform violence. AVP, which is what we call it, builds on a spiritual base of caring for self and others in prisons and in the wider community. I took a workshop, the original workshop, years ago. It happened to be on a Unitarian Universalist campus in Thousand Oaks. After the weekend, I really enjoyed myself and I learned a lot. I did another weekend and then I became a facilitator. I've worked many times at Lompoc Prison and also at the women's prison in Chowchilla, where I am the connector. But I haven't stepped foot in a prison in 3 years since COVID. Locally, we have done what prison inmates ask us to do, and that is teach young people these skills so they won't end up in prison. The Santa Barbara AVP is a multicultural group, a volunteer organization that teaches conflict management and skills to teens who drop out of junior high school or are referred by the unified school system. Everyone who takes a workshop chooses to do it. Nobody is sentenced to do it. You actually have to choose to do it. They're experiential workshops. They introduce skills and resources to deal with conflict in a positive way, in a fun way actually, and empower people to become peacemakers. During the pandemic, the local group transitioned to outdoor workshops and also worked with families, because our biggest problem in this community is gang violence. Most murders happen in this town because of gang violence. You don't necessarily hear about it. But to encourage a parent to have their child attend a workshop when the East Side gang is going to be there and your kid's in the West Side gang is not an easy thing to do. But during the process, in just a few minutes, these kids learn how to get along with each other. So we work with the families. We also help them access resources for their kids to succeed. Since 2018, SB AVP graduates have become empowered to return to school and have substantially fewer fights. Most of our Santa Barbara County murders, as I said, come from gang violence. This program is a direct way to turn that around. To learn more about SB AVP, including how to volunteer, you can talk to me afterwards in the garden, or just Google sbavp.org. And now if you will join me in reciting, or if you probably have it memorized, the affirmation for this morning's offering. It'll be on the screen. Let us be grateful when we are able to give, for many do not have that privilege. Let us be grateful for those who share their gifts, for we are enriched by their giving. Let us be grateful even for our needs, so that we may learn from the generosity of others.
The chorus to the offertory will have the lyrics on the screen, so if you feel so moved, please feel free in joining us in singing.
For
Hello again. Why is Passover an important celebration to me? Firstly, you may have guessed, I was raised Jewish. It was always impressed upon me the importance of Judaism in my family. We weren't strictly religious, don't get me wrong. In fact, I hated Sunday school. I put up such a fuss that after 4th grade, my mom gave up and I didn't have to go. Every year, however, our family life centered around the Jewish holidays. In the fall, the High Holy Days, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. In the winter, Hanukkah, of course, 8 days of presents, what's not to like? And in the spring, of course, Passover. When I was very young, Passover often meant a huge family Seder at our cousin's house. It was one of the rare times each year that my grandfather's entire extended family got together, and there were a lot of them. He had a sister who had 10 kids, and they all had families. The ceremony was long, and I was always so hungry by the time the meal came, and that although I was a very picky eater and hated fish, I managed to eat even the gefilte fish with a huge dollop of horseradish on it. Even so, it was a warm and loving gathering. Passover, as Chuck mentioned, thank you, is celebrated over 8 days. And for that whole week, Jews should not eat anything with any leavening, any grains whatsoever, nothing with flour. And I lost my place again. And we often attended, the first night was a family Seder with cousins and stuff, and we often attended a second Seder during that week with the congregation at my grandparents' large and prominent temple in San Francisco. It was during one such Seder, I must have been 11 or 12, when in the middle of it, the doors burst open and an angry man in a trench coat, black hat, and black gloves entered, fist raised, shouting, "Heil Hitler." It was then he was quickly pushed out, and we resumed, but I was forever changed. I knew then that this wasn't just an old, irrelevant story. Hatred and anti-Semitism were still out there. I realized that it was profoundly important for us to remember to keep the Passover and do whatever it takes to ensure that freedom and tolerance can endure. I have since attended or hosted many joyful Seders over the years. The celebration never gets old for me. After my husband Ken and I joined USSB here, we learned that there were a number of Junitarians in the congregation, and we happily joined with this congregation at our UU Passover Seders. It's been a tradition at USSB off and on since before we joined, and that's over 35 years ago. After the second or third Seder here that we attended, I asked the leaders to help for the following year's Seder. This lovely elderly couple, Elsie and Slam Sklar, who some of you may remember, they'd been organizing it, and they handed me their Haggadah and said, "Great, here, you do it." So off and on for the last several years, we've been hosting it. And I took great pride in reviewing a whole slew of Haggadahs and creating our own Unitarian Society's Haggadah. To me, the most important takeaway of any Passover Seder is that we must complete it not with a sense of having celebrated an interesting tradition of one religion, but more importantly, with a feeling that this festival is a living part of our tradition, our future, and our world. And one final note, again, it's this coming Wednesday. There's still space. It's going to be smaller this year. There are only about 35 people signed up so far, so it's not going to be really crowded if you're worried about being in crowds. And I will be at the table if you have any questions or want to sign up during coffee hour.
Two years ago, I shared a reflection about what Passover meant for me as a child. I mentioned the food and drink, the conspiratorial delight the kids shared as they watched the adults get tipsier and tipsier, and the telling and retelling of a story of freedom and liberation. As a youngster, I found everything enchanting, even though I occasionally dozed off before the meal concluded. It was for me a magical time. What mattered most was being with my friends, appropriately misbehaving, and devouring all the sponge cake and strawberries I could get my grubby little paws on. Heady concepts like emancipation and liberation, integral to the evening, were little more than words on the page, although my parents did try their hardest to make me connect these words to the troubled history of our own country. Then the inevitable happened. I grew up, and memories of Seders of my childhood, both the Yiddish-inflected variety in my grandparents' home, as well as the more modern ones at homes of friends, receded into the background. I slowly began to lose my grip on the magic of the holiday, becoming cynical and judgmental about so much that had sustained me as a child. Around issues of Judaism, I took an especially contrary stand whenever and wherever possible, puzzling my parents and deeply wounding my grandparents, for whom being Jewish was less a matter of adherence to a set of religious beliefs than a comforting way to organize their lives as strangers in a strange land. I reserve special criticism and scorn for the Passover story, and even today, as a somewhat mellowed 77-year-old struggling to return to her roots, two elements of this celebration that I so cherished as a young person remain deeply problematic. However, in good Jewish fashion, I feel empowered to question these aspects that I find so challenging. I'm comfortable borrowing heavily from a tradition that encourages argument over every word, every phrase, every meaning, even in the most sacred texts. My first problem is connected to the name of the holiday itself, Passover. As the ancients tell us, Yahweh, God, sent 10 plagues down upon the Egyptians to force Pharaoh to free Jews from bondage. While all 10 were decidedly unpleasant, the 10th, the killing of the firstborn Egyptian children, was far and away the most severe. To avoid this dastardly fate, Yahweh instructed the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and mark the lintels and doorposts of their homes with its blood. Thus identified, Jewish homes would be passed over and the firstborn child spared. A central reason why so many progressive Jews joyously continue to celebrate Passover is that the holiday explicitly calls out the cruelty of slavery and underscores the universal desire for freedom. Regrettably, though, it also underscores the bitter price of vengeance as the 10th plague reached not only the doorsteps of the mighty and privileged, but extended to all firstborn Egyptian children, the offspring of servants as well as masters. When faced with the question, what price freedom, I often reflect upon the impossibly high price someone else's child paid for my ancestors' chance to live free. My second area of discomfort revolves around a concept that appears in most Haggadahs and is exceedingly timely. Let me rehearse a bit of history here. In June 1967, hostilities broke out again between Israel and her Arab neighbors. Before the war, parts of the old city of Jerusalem had been under the control of the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, and Jews had been barred from entering sections of the city where the most sacred sites of Judaism are located. When the Six-Day War ended, Israel had gained critical and contested territory, including the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and most symbolically, all of the city of Jerusalem. This history is particularly relevant to the stories we tell and retell at the Seder, as most Haggadahs end with the phrase, "next year in Jerusalem." For centuries, next year in Jerusalem was purely aspirational, symbolizing a moment that few imagined would ever arrive. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 and shift in control of Jerusalem after the Six-Day War turned this symbolic and aspirational statement into something far more tangible and far more fraught. Jerusalem was once again in Jewish hands, and next year became, rather than a symbol or a dream, a concrete possibility. But Jerusalem was not empty space, not a vast and unpopulated territory simply awaiting someone's return. It was and is central to the aspirations of the Palestinian people as well, and by all rights should serve as the capital of a free and independent Palestine, with guaranteed rights of access for all to the sites sacred to Judaism. So what to do about next year in Jerusalem? How does one measure ancestral dreams for wholeness, peace, and return against the geopolitical reality that has become increasingly complex and intractable? Regrettably, we need to ponder this question in an era where anti-Semitism has reached new heights globally, and the right-wing coalition that currently rules Israel is trampling on the rights of both Jews and Palestinians. We're witnessing the facile conflation of Jew, Zionist, and Israel, raising the temperature and increasing the hostility. The marked rise in anti-Semitism, particularly in our own country, is causing even some secular Jews, people with no strong attachment to the state of Israel, to ponder whether there's any place outside a majority Jewish state where a Jew can have even the illusion of safety. I suggest that we follow the lead of those creative folks who have taken a progressive pen to the Haggadah, and rather than eliminating the next year in phrase, are reimagining it with language that speaks to, honors, and respects all people who seek security and self-determination. Much as we in Santa Barbara endeavor to honor the Chumash upon whose land this city stands, we are duty-bound to acknowledge contested lives and lives disrupted, while at the same time speak of a next year where all people are free, living in peace and in homes and homelands of their choosing, even if that means attempting the seemingly impossible task of sharing that precious space. Despite my dilemmas, I continue to love Passover and look forward to the food, the songs, the ritual, and even the story, especially when it's recast in terms of true liberation and real freedom. For me, one of the joys is discovering how others have taken the sacred texts and molded them to fit our times. Blessedly, there are voices in the wilderness still singing out songs of liberation, and as the activist group American Jewish World Service reminds us, we need to sing these songs as we bring social justice to the Seder table. We need to make a prayer or a mantra out of the words that accompany the 4 ritual glasses of wine: awakening, solidarity, action, and most importantly, freedom. A happy and peaceful and joyous Pesach to you all.
Closing hymn, we're going to practice the pronunciation before we jump in. So, choir, if you could come up, and everyone, the lyrics will be on the screen, but if you'd like to read the hymnal as well. That is number 280. 280. All right. Everyone repeat after me, please. Hallelujah. 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 Betzil Tzele. Betzil Tzele. Shama. Shama. Hallelujah. 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 Betzil Tzele. Betzil Tzele. Teruah. Teruah. Kol Hanshama. Kol Hanshama. Tehalelia. Tehalelia. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Next to you, or place your hand over your heart. And as we end our time of worship together, let us acknowledge and give thanks for all that is good and beautiful around us, for the challenges we face with grace and fortitude, and for the love and support of our UU community and the community we're striving to build in peace and security for all. And as you venture out into this beautiful and heartbreaking world, may the light of love shine upon you, out from within you, be gracious unto you, and bring you peace. For this is the day we are given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And let us call out a blessing.
All right, if you'd like to stick around for a little Zoom coffee hour, please let me know. Yay, all right, Paul, you unmuted, I can tell. Oh, no, you're gone. You may unmute yourselves. Is it working? People are peeling off. Gary, you did it.
Well,
Lori.
it just looks like Lori and me.
Yeah, I know Hod and Lorraine, who usually are around for Zoom, they happen to be here this week, so.
Maxine.
Maxine, I don't see her. There she goes.
Yep.
Well.
Oh, I had a question for you, Eden.
Okay,
I became a 10-year member last October 2022. Do I get a little thing for my badge?
oh yeah, I can absolutely get it. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. I will go do that.
All right.
And then next time you're here,
Hopefully.
it'll be good.
Okay.
All right,
Take care. Bye-bye.
you too, bye.